A 9th-century monastery recorded Viking violence, while Scandinavian victims of neighboring armies left far fewer words behind. That imbalance shapes the comparison before a single weapon is counted. Viking raiders killed, wounded, enslaved, displaced, and intimidated communities across Europe. Their violence was real, deliberate, and sometimes organized on a formidable scale. Yet Franks, Anglo-Saxons, Slavs, and other neighbors also waged destructive wars within comparable political worlds. The useful question is not which people possessed cruelty, but how violence was organized, targeted, remembered, and restrained. Written survival makes Scandinavian attacks unusually visible because literate religious institutions often became victims. Monasteries kept books, stored portable wealth, and understood assault through Christian moral language. Their annals could interpret raids as divine punishment while preserving valuable dates and locations. Such testimony records genuine harm, but it does not measure every violent act equally. An attack on a church entered texts more readily than a feud at an undocumented farm. Scandinavian communities produced fewer contemporary narratives, leaving their losses and internal conflicts comparatively muted. Archaeology corrects part of this asymmetry without identifying every perpetrator. Burned buildings, weapon injuries, mass burials, fortifications, and abandoned settlements can indicate severe disruption. None automatically proves Viking action because fire, wounds, and hurried burial have multiple possible causes. Secure context, dating, and independent records must converge before attribution becomes strong. The early raids were especially shocking because ships delivered small forces rapidly to exposed coasts. Attackers could select weak targets, seize valuables or captives, and depart before regional forces assembled. It also made violence seem unpredictable to communities accustomed to threats traveling along known roads. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 became emblematic through Northumbrian and continental written responses. Its fame does not mean it was Europe's first early medieval attack on a religious site. Christian rulers had already fought rivals, plundered communities, and interfered with monasteries during internal wars. What distinguished Lindisfarne was the attacker's foreignness, maritime arrival, and place within providential writing. Charlemagne's wars against the Saxons lasted decades and combined campaigning, submission, rebellion, deportation, and forced Christianization. The royal Frankish annals celebrate royal success, so their violence appears as legitimate rule rather than alien predation. The massacre at Verdun in 782, where annals report thousands executed, remains debated in interpretation and number. Other Carolingian campaigns also destroyed resistance through repeated occupation, punishment, and removal. Even with uncertainty, Carolingian expansion clearly imposed lethal coercion on resisting populations. Viking annals and Frankish annals therefore categorize similar suffering through opposing political vocabularies. Labels change moral framing without changing a burned dwelling's consequences. Early coastal strikes differed from the larger Scandinavian armies operating in England after 1865. Those forces wintered, took territory, demanded supplies, fought kingdoms, and supported settlement. Their violence increasingly resembled conquest rather than brief plunder. Anglo-Saxon rulers answered with field armies, fortified towns, tribute, executions, and counteroffensives. Alfred's successors expanded West Saxon power into territories held by Scandinavian leaders. Neither side relied on battle alone. Fortification, negotiation, oath-taking, taxation, and hostage exchange structured conflict. Civilian communities fed armies regardless of which language commanders spoke. Requisitioned grain, damaged harvests, and interrupted trade could harm people without leaving weapon wounds. Captivity exposes another shared institution with distinct Viking visibility: Scandinavian raiders seized people for sale, ransom, labor, sexual exploitation, and political bargaining. Markets and households across Europe already used unfree labor under varied legal categories. Viking maritime networks expanded the distances through which captives could be moved. Irish records describe captives taken during attacks, while archaeology and later law illuminate dependency within Scandinavian societies. No surviving total permits a reliable comparison of enslavement rates among every neighboring population. Still, omitting captives would falsely reduce raids to property theft. Ireland shows violence entangled with local politics rather than divided into natives and invaders. Norse bases such as Dublin supported raiding and commerce, but Scandinavian leaders also formed alliances with Irish rulers. Irish kings fought one another, employed Norse forces, attacked Norse settlements, and contested captives and tribute. Ethnic labels alone cannot explain who faced whom in every campaign. The same complexity appears in Francia, where rulers sometimes paid Scandinavian leaders or granted them territory. Tribute could purchase temporary departure, redirect attackers, or strengthen one faction against another. Violence functioned within negotiation rather than standing outside it. Scandinavian travelers joined river trade, tribute collection, warfare, settlement, and service among diverse communities. The primary chronicle was compiled much later and organizes early Rus history around dynastic and Christian purposes. It cannot be read as a neutral transcript of 9th century violence. Byzantine and Arabic sources add perspectives, but each describes specific encounters and audiences. No unified Viking method operated unchanged from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Swords, spears, axes, bows, and shields circulated across cultural and political borders. An object's form may suggest production traditions, yet possession does not securely identify ethnicity. Mass graves can reveal trauma and hurried treatment, but attackers often remain unnamed. At Ridgeway Hill in England, executed males were interpreted through dating and isotope evidence as probable Scandinavian origin victims. That site reverses the expected image by placing likely Scandinavians among those killed. Interpretation remains tied to context rather than a universal story about either group. Warfare also operated below royal campaigns through feud and local coercion. Later Scandinavian laws regulate compensation, outlawry, homicide, and assembly procedure, though manuscripts postdate much Viking Age practice. Their provisions suggest societies attempting to contain vengeance through negotiated settlements and public judgment. Anglo-Saxon and Frankish law codes pursued comparable control using different institutions and penalties. The existence of law proves neither peace nor constant disorder. It shows authorities recognizing violence as a social problem requiring classification. Honor encouraged retaliation in many early medieval settings, but communities also valued settlement because endless feud was costly. Weapons communicated readiness and status even when never used in recorded combat. Gender and age further complicate any violence rate. Armed groups were often male, yet women, children, elderly people, and enslaved workers bore displacement and economic loss. Some women exercised political power or accompanied migrations, but evidence does not make warfare socially universal. Children could be taken captive, incorporated into households, or left within disrupted communities. These consequences rarely receive the narrative space given to famous commanders. Religious difference sharpened descriptions without wholly determining conduct. Christian authors condemned pagan attackers, but Christian armies also attacked Christian rivals. Converted Scandinavian rulers continued warfare while adopting new claims of legitimacy. Faith altered alliances, burial, kingship, and rhetoric more reliably than it ended coercion. By the 11th century, Scandinavian kings commanded Christian armies and collected taxes across consolidated realms. Their campaigns increasingly entered the same diplomatic language as neighboring monarchies. That transition did not civilize an inherently savage population. It changed who could authorize force, extract resources, and describe conquest as lawful. Comparing casualty totals would be attractive, but the records cannot sustain it. Chronicles omit routine harm, exaggerate or compress armies, and survive unevenly across regions. Responsible comparison therefore examines patterns rather than pretending to possess complete statistics. Viking forces were unusually effective at converting maritime mobility into surprise, capture, and political leverage. Their neighbors sometimes exceeded them in territorial resources, administrative reach, siege capacity, or prolonged campaigning. Both raiders and kingdoms could alternate between violence, tribute, alliance, intermarriage, and settlement. No society held a monopoly on brutality, and equivalence should not erase particular crimes. The Scandinavian enslavement of captives remains historically specific, even when slavery existed elsewhere. Frankish deportations remain distinct, even though Viking armies displaced communities too. Precise comparison preserves these differences instead of balancing them into moral arithmetic. Contemporary fear tells us Viking attacks felt devastating to those exposed along coasts and rivers. Political history shows neighboring rulers capable of destruction on equal or greater institutional scales. Archaeology reveals perpetrators becoming victims, settlers, allies, and subjects as circumstances changed. The fairest conclusion is neither uniquely savage Vikings nor harmless traders misunderstood by hostile monks. Viking violence was severe, strategically mobile, and highly visible within an age where organized coercion surrounded them. Their reputation grew from actual attacks, multiplied by surprise, religious outrage, and the unequal survival of testimony.